Joining us is Independent Women's Voice CEO and President Heather Higgins. Heather, President Donald Trump told the Associated Press to expect a big announcement on tax reform on Wednesday. Massive tax cut, I think was the word he used. He didn't say it quite like that.
Donald Trump never tells us to expect small announcements. They're by definition going to be huge and monumental. But it is. It's a very big deal. There's this artificial push. Remember, FDR in his inaugural speech talked about the 100 days. That's where that all came from. And everybody forgets that that was just the lead into his saying, and if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to assume dictatorial powers. Maybe Donald Trump is going to read the rest of his speech and say, you know, give me what I want, or this will not be a happy outcome for you. But we're in this problem because we have the Senate that has a filibuster that prevents anything from getting even debated on this, what's putatively the most deliberative body in the world. They don't deliberate, and so you get to this CR crunch constantly. Right. Either they'll solve it this week or we'll probably get a short-term one-week CR to extend it. But everybody wants a win. We're in a very different place.
You're talking about on the spending.
On the spending, but also on the health care bill. I think it's very likely that we will see a health care bill this week. You've had a big shift. Remember when the first bill came through, a lot of the conservatives felt that they were not, even though there had been some discussions with some people, they felt like they didn't know what was going on, and it didn't include the most important parts, which were the regulatory reforms to drive down costs. Now you've got a very different universe where a lot of the same people who were agitating to not vote for the bill are running ads against moderates if they don't vote for the bill. I think the Freedom Caucus is now in a place where they want to win. It's not going to be a perfect win.
Well, then why didn't Paul Ryan talk about that in the conference call on Saturday? Because he's basically avoided the issues. Fox News was reporting over the weekend that he did not come out and say that there was going to be movement on health care. He somewhat actually put that to the side. Paul Ryan's the one that has to bring this party back up and running this week.
Because if he tees it up as though they're about to do a win and they don't get it this week, then he's going to have some explaining to do. Whereas if he low plays it and then something happens once he's sure he's got the votes, that's when he's going to talk about it.
But what is it that's really changed here from last time? I mean, we've heard this talk of giving states the ability to exempt out of these essential mandates, but is that the only thing that's really changed here, and is that enough to bring moderates on board? It seems like they're still concerned about the Medicaid tax or Medicaid cuts. They're still concerned about, you know, not enough subsidies for seniors and for low-income individuals. Has that changed at all?
It's changed somewhat from what I understand. And look, I'm no more privy to this than a lot of the members of Congress who are still waiting to hear what the details are.
I read the draft, the MacArthur Amendment draft from last week, but it's, you know, it's like not even a page.
Right.
It's talking points,
it's
right?
talking points, and it's all very subject to change. It looks like there's going to be flexibility for states to opt out. What that means is that the moderate Democrats who are from states that were high-cost insurance states to begin with, they don't even have to worry about whether or not anybody's going to be not covered because their states aren't going to opt out of this stuff. But what for those who had their insurance premiums go sky high and all the rest of it because of the Obamacare regulations, if their states opt out, as I understand what's being discussed presently, as long as they are providing at least some plans that would be compliant, then they can create functioning insurance markets for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question. Do you think that the Republicans, they've been saying for years they can't wait to repeal Obamacare, and now they're sort of stuttering? And I'm wondering if they're more concerned about the media coming after them and pulling back from some of those states that want their constituents to have it, or if they're concerned about their constituents who asked them all along, we voted you in to pull it back.
You know, Kahneman and Tversky have done really interesting work, as well as others, on what human beings focus on.
These are economists, by the way.
Well, and psychologists, really.
Didn't they win the...
Kahneman's a psychologist who's the only psychologist who's ever won an economics Nobel.
Right.
And one of the things that he points out is that people tend to focus on what's being talked about. That rises in your perceptions of urgency. And Ovik Roy at Forbes has got this great piece talking about how the Democrats talked about pre-existing conditions as though this was, you know, the great problem and crisis of our country. And remember Obama talking about 129 million people. Well, it turned out there were only 114,000 people who needed some help with the pre-existing conditions. But that's all they talk about. So if you look at the plan now, there's much less concern for the average Trump voter who's worried about potentially being uninsured or the cost of their premiums than there is for the pre-existing conditions. So that's going to get solved in this deal. And I think what's going to happen is when you come back to the Senate piece, that's when the rest of this is going to come in.
With the tax reform plan that President Trump is promising will be announced, it's just a framework. My understanding is it's just a framework. Do you have a sense of when that would move, potentially?
My understanding is that they are trying to move this really quite quickly. We will see. And the Senate becomes a whole different ball of wax. But there's talk of doing it this week. I am dubious that this deal will get done in time for anything substantive to happen on the tax side.
But you do think that, because the lead story in the Wall Street Journal today is that the push for border wall funding out of the Trump administration is, to use the Journal's word, muddying the budget talks.
They may call it muddying, but Trump's a deal guy, right?
Right.
You get your deals by asking for more than you expect to get. And so he's loading up his asks so that he can then have something to pull back from and get something that moves towards border protection. It probably won't be full wall funding, but he'll get something, and he's now got another negotiating
They
chip.
asked earlier this year in the $30 billion supplemental funding bill to Congress, only it was $1.5 billion was in it for wall funding. And then recently we had the Homeland Security Secretary talking about his biggest, I think the next terror attack could be committed by somebody coming across the southern border.
His fear about he said that last week in that press conference. He said his biggest fear, what keeps him up at night, is the southern border. That goes to the argument for a wall. What it looks like, is it a physical wall or is it sensors, electronic monitoring is debatable.
So do you think there's funding for at least some partial funding for the wall in this spending bill?
Well, even Mick Mulvaney was saying, it might be border security, it might be something other than a physical wall. And remember, you just had those power outages in 3 cities simultaneously. That is going to reawaken concerns about the fact that we have a very unsecure electrical grid, whether it's through, solar, EMP, cyber. This is a very big deal in terms of if you are concerned about our security and our well-being and functioning as a country.
Great insight, Heather. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
My pleasure.
We'll see how much they get done. Heather Higgins, take care. Please come back soon.